In the Web 2.0 world, cultural heritage institutions have extended their presence beyond their physical spaces and geographical locations. They are embracing the opportunities virtual branches offer them for engaging users who may not otherwise be able to access their activities and collections. In constructing virtual branches, cultural heritage institutions are expected to adhere to particular standards and guidelines which ensure all users have equitable access to their services. In this presentation, I consider three cultural heritage virtual branches: the Museum of Brisbane, the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery, and the National Museum of Australia. The understanding of concepts, guidelines and standards is also informed by a short discussion of accessibility and its challenges as outlined in scholarly literature. It is against this background and context that I present an analysis of each virtual branch, considering the role of online evaluation tools in assessing accessibility compliance. Following this, I discuss the relative success of each institution's virtual branch in terms of accessibility. I discuss instances and make further suggestions for best practice, as well as making recommendations for improvement. This presentation is in three parts. Part 1 provides an overview of the presentation, outlining the scope, purpose, and explaining the presentation's key terms. Part 2 presents details of the key concepts of accessibility, including the guidelines, standards, legalities, and some of the scholarly commentary available on the topic. Part 3 provides the analysis of the chosen virtual branches and engages in a discussion of best practice in using evaluation tools, the techniques employed, and draws conclusions about the relative success of each example presented. My analysis of each cultural heritage institution's virtual branch focuses on their home pages only. While of course virtual branches encompass much more than a usable find on the home page, an extensive 2003 study by Lazar, Beer, Greenwich and Nagappa justified the decision to focus on home pages only, as they argued these reflect most on the organisation. Although this reasoning has been legitimately questioned by Hackett and Parmento, within the limits of this presentation the home pages must be sufficient. A more detailed analysis could indeed include more than home pages, but this is beyond the scope of this presentation. Through my discussion of accessibility guidelines, literature on accessibility, and the analysis of our three examples, this presentation emphasises the importance of information professionals engaging in best practice. I highlight the necessity of having a clear, conceptual and practical understanding of web accessibility for online services, and for information professionals this should be the key theme of my presentation. My presentation employs the following key terms and defines them as follows. Firstly, there are key bodies and projects associated with defining web accessibility. Of chief importance is the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C, the internationally recognised body for the web, whose stated mission is to lead the World Wide Web to its full potential by developing protocols and guidelines that ensure the long-term growth of the web. W3C hosts the Web Accessibility Initiative, or WAI. The mission of the WAI is to develop guidelines that are widely regarded as the international standard for web accessibility, to support materials to help understand and implement web accessibility, and to develop resources through international collaboration. The WAI defines web accessibility as meaning people with disabilities can perceive, understand, navigate and interact with the web, and that they can contribute to the web. From these initial guiding statements from the WAI, we might develop a working definition of web accessibility as inclusive practices of web design implemented according to internationally agreed standards. But just where do these standards come from? The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, have been developed by the W3C, and the current version in place is WCAG 2.0. As I shall discuss further in the presentation, there are different levels of standards and forms of compliance within the WCAG and indeed within WCAG 2.0. And we will be looking at the standards adopted in Australia. At this point in the presentation, however, it is enough to understand the work of the W3C, both through the WAI and in the development of WCAG. My focus here is accessibility and cultural heritage virtual branches. Cultural heritage institutions include libraries, museums, art galleries and archives. Here, as noted, I am looking at museums. Finding a clearer definition of cultural heritage assists us in understanding why accessibility should be a key issue for information professionals working in these online environments. Just what is the practice of cultural heritage? Some useful definitions are provided by the Victorian Government's Department of Planning and Community Development. One comes from the Australian Government Department of Sustainability, Environment, Water, Population and Communities. They note that heritage is all the things that make up Australia's identity, our spirit and ingenuity, our historic buildings and our unique living landscapes. Our heritage is a legacy from our past, a living integral part of life today, and the stories and places we pass on to future generations. They provide a second statement on cultural heritage from the Donald Horne Institute for Cultural Heritage at the University of Canberra. There, cultural heritage is defined as the things, places and practices that define who we are as individuals, as communities, as nations or civilizations, and as a species. It is that which we want to keep, share and pass on. These definitions of cultural heritage emphasise that it is a practice of communication from the past through to the future. If this is the case, then accessibility of cultural heritage virtual branches becomes vitally important. For if the accessibility of a museum's virtual branch is poor, then the institution's ability to share and pass on our cultural heritage will certainly be hampered, if not ineffective. Virtual or digital branches are now a ubiquitous feature of the information landscape. More than simply a website associated with an information organisation, King provides a nuanced and helpful description of the digital branch in terms of libraries, which can be applied to other information institutions, including the ones I'm looking at here. King notes, a digital branch is a branch library delivered digitally on the web. It offers much more than a traditional library website in many ways, because a digital branch has real staff, a real building, a real collection, and real community happening on and around it. So, the digital or virtual branches of the museums discussed in this presentation also have their own staffing, infrastructure, and online collections that are different from the physical collections. Similarly, they have a community of users constructed via social media and other forms of user experience and participation, which may not be the same as visiting the institution in person. Now that I've outlined the purpose and scope of my presentation and the key terms and concepts have been introduced, we can move to the second part of the presentation. Following a short literature review focusing on web accessibility guidelines and their implementation, I undertake an analysis of the accessibility of the 3 chosen museum virtual branches. The analysis is based on the accessibility testing that can be undertaken with online tools. There are advantages and disadvantages to using online testing tools, and this will be discussed. In particular, the need for a user-centred approach that is advocated in a number of readings is emphasised.